Today's daf is Menachos daf Peites, and we are at the sixth wide line of daf Peiches Amid Beis. Amar Rav Huna Bereider Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Huna Bereider Rav Yehuda said in the name of the Amoira Rav Sheshes, Ner Shebemikdash, the Neiros, the lamps of the menorah. So that's the part of the menorah where the fire was. Shall Prokim have. Was attached to the menorah itself, but at the same time was flexible in the sense that when the kohen came to be mate of the neiros to clean out the wicks and the oil from the day before, he was able to bend the lamps towards him, so that would be easier for him to clean it. Now, we're all familiar that the menorah was miksha. It was made out of one piece of solid gold. Rav Sheshes was saying that when we say that the menorah was made up of one piece of solid gold, it means the neiros as well. They too were included in what the Torah meant when it said that the menorah had to be miksha, but at the same time, you were able to bend those parts of the menorah, and it was necessary to bend it to be able to properly be made of the neiros. And the Gemara explains, that when the Torah says kikar, when the Torah says miksha, when the Torah describes the menorah that it has to be made up of one piece of solid gold that weighs a kikar, it doesn't just mean the base of the menorah, but it means the entire menorah. It means the neiros as well. And keep it mean that you have to be able to clean the neiros. Ilav de prakim havi. If its parts would not have the ability to bend backward and forward, if they wouldn't be flexible, it'd be very difficult to properly clean it. Thus, Rav Sheshes said it must be that the Ner Shebemikdash shall prakim have. I'll ask you a question. From a brayso, how was the kohen mate of the neiros? Misalkon. He would remove the neiros, physically remove the neiros from the menorah. Umanichan ba'oil, he would leave them in the oil moed. Umikanchem b'svaig, he would clean them with a svaig. V'noisem Hashem madlikan, and then he would repeat, and he would do it all over again. Why is this a kasha of Rav Sheshes? Because the Brisa says mefurish that the neiros were able to be removed. Bal karachach, when it says in the Torah that the menorah had to be miksha, it doesn't mean to include the neiros. It means the base of the menorah. But as it relates to the arms of the menorah, what the Gemara refers to as the neiros, that's something you would be able to remove. So how could Rav Sheshes and Amoira say something that contradicts a Brisa? So the Gemara says, the reason Rav Sheshes can say something that's inconsistent with the Brisa is because he has a Tana de Misayele. There's another brisa that supports Rav Sheshes. So granted, there's a brisa not like Rav Sheshes, but there's also a brisa that supports Rav Sheshes. Time to learn to the brisa. Chachamim say that it's not true. They never removed the neiros from the menorah. Now the Gemara says, sounds like if they wanted to, they could have removed it. It's just that they did it. Should we infer from the lashon of the Chachamim, they didn't do it, as if to say if they wanted to do it, they could have done it? Why not? So Rashi explains, because if it would have been possible to remove it, the Chachamim would have never said they didn't do it. There's no chumrah in not removing the neiros from the menorah. To the contrary, the chumrah would be to remove the neiros from the menorah, so that you should be able to do the hatavas haneiros properly. So why would the Chachamim say lo hayu mazizin oisam imkaima? So the Gemara edits the brayso. What it must mean is that you could not remove it. The bottom line is that even though it's true, there's a brayso that says how is the hatavas haneiros done? Salka, and they would remove the neiros, but at the same time, there's also a chachamim that says that you couldn't remove it. A shaila whether or not the neiros were included in what the Torah meant when it said miksha. The bottom line is Rav Sheshes was clearly paskening like one of these tanoim, the tanoim that hold that the neiros had to be part of the miksha that was the menorah. If that's the case, how did they do atavas and eris? So that was Rav Sheshes' chiddush al prakamai. So it was flexible. Thus, you were able to bend the neiros so that the kohen would be able to properly do the hatavas. Says the Gemara, who are the chachamim that hold that you couldn't remove the neiros from the menorah? Rabbi Lazar, Rab Tzadik, who the Tanya went to the Brayso, Rabbi Tzadik goyim came in tashazav hayala al gaba. There was a small, thin golden plate that was on the very top of the menorah where the fire was, where the wick was. When the kohen would be made of the neiros, He would have to push that tas inward to be able to clean out everything that he needed to clean out. And when he put the shemen, he would have to lift it a little bit to be able to get the oil in. The bottom line is, Rabbi Elazar Tzaddik again is saying that the way that Havas HaNeros was done was with the neros attached to the menorah. Clearly, it could not be detached. Thus, it's Rabbi Elazar Tzaddik, that's the Chachamim that holds that the neros were included in the halacha of Miksha. And the Gemara says, by the way, I'll find you another brisa. So the Gemara has many brises and shitas atana that seem to have to discuss the shayla, whether the neros was included in the Miksha of the menorah or not. What's this final brisa? The Tanya we learned to the brisa, menorah v'neros bois menakikar. The menorah and its neros were included in what the Torah means when it says the menorah has to weigh a kikar. However, the tools that were used to clean the menorah, that's not included in the kikar. Rav Nechemya says the menorah was included in kikar. So when the Torah says kikar, what part of the menorah is it referring to? It's a machlokes Tana. The Tana Kama says it's referring to the menorah and the neros. It just is not including the tools, but the menorah itself, even the neros, are included in what the Torah means when it says kikar, and what the Torah means when it says miksha. Nechemia says no, it's only the menorah itself, not malkachel, machtesel, also not neirosel. What's the machlekes b'haikra? The Tanya we learned in the Brayso. So the pasuk says regarding the menorah, kikar zahav tahar yasa oisa es kol hakelim ha'ela. That's the pasuk in its entirety. Kikar zahav tahar yasa oisa lamadnu the menorah shebam kikar. We learn from here that the menorah has to be a kikar. Rabbi Sneiris said, how do you know the neiros are included in that? Talmud loymar es kol hakelim ha'ela. Kikar zahav tahar yasa oisa, and then it says as kol hakelim ha'ela. It's coming to include something. It's coming to be marba the neiros. Yochashani marba av malkachel machtesel. I would think to be marba the tools that were used to clean the menorah as well. Talmud loymar oisa. Kikar zav tar yasa oisa. So although you have as kol hakelim ha'ela, that's being marba, you also have oisa, that's being memait. Divrei Rab Nechemya. Fake the Gemara. Divrei Rab Nechemya. Rab Nechemya was the one that said that it was only the menorah that was bamin hakikar, not the neros, not the malkachel machtesel. Here we have Divrei Rab Nechemya that's marba the neros from his kol hakelim ha'ela. He's only memait the tools from oisa. It's a steer in Rab Nechemya. Kash Rab Nechemya. Rab Nechemya says the Gemara. Trei Tanoy v'alibid Rab Nechemya. It's true. You have a blatant stira between two Rab Nechemyas. Must be two Tanom was saying over what they had heard from Nechemya. Each one had heard something else. Regardless, it's not a stira. B'shuman karcha imer menorah ba min hakikar. B'shuman karcha says the menorah was kikar ve'in malkochel umachtoiseh menorah ba min hakikar. He's the other shita. He holds that the neros were not included in kikar. Well, mani mekayim es kol hakelim ha'ela. Doesn't it say as kol hakelim ha'ela, which Rab Nechemya said is coming to be marba the neros? It is coming to be marba the neros, but not with regards to the halach of miksha, not with regards to the halach of kikar, but rather something else. Shahayu kelim shal zahav. It's coming to say that the neros also had to be made out of gold. Says the Gemara, zahav behedik sebei. I don't need a ribui to tell me that the neros have to be made out of gold. There is no debate that the neros had to be gold. What we're debating in this sugya is whether the neros are included in miksha, whether they're included in kikar, but gold, it's a pasuk. Vasisas neroisel shiva vehelas neroisel veheir al ever ponel umalkoichel umachtesel zahav tar. Even the malkoichel machtesel everything had to be gold. So why do I need a ribui to tell me that it had to be gold? The Gemara says like nitzrucha elalapineris. It's referring to the pea, the very very top of the nair, where the wick meets the gold of the menorah. So I would have thought, being that part of the menorah is going to get black from the smoke of the menorah, so you would think Atayra Chasa Al Mamoinam Shal Yisrael, because you're going to have to continuously replace it. So maybe that spitz of the menorah, that part, maybe doesn't have to be Zahav Tar, meaning La'avid Zahav Koldahu. Maybe just make it even an inferior quality of gold. Doesn't have to be that best type of gold. Kamash Malon. The bottom line is, what do we take out of this brisa? Again, another brisa with the Tanoim. We're arguing whether or not the Neiros of the menorah were included in Kikar, whether the Neiros of the menorah were included in Miksha. Bottom line is, Rav Sheshis began this morning's daf with a memra where Rav Sheshis said that the neiros of the menorah were attached to the menorah, but at the same time they were flexible. So that when the kohen did atavas haneiros, he was able to remove it. The Gemara said, what? The neiros were attached. There's a brisa that says that the way the kohen was made of the neiros, he would physically remove the arms of the menorah and clean it. Not that it was attached but flexible. So what the Gemara did was, the Gemara showed brisa after brisa after brisa, machlekes tanam after machlekes tanam. There really was a debate amongst the tanam, and all Rav Sheshes was really doing was being machriya amongst the tanam. Either way, so the Mishnah was discussing the different shiurim as it relates to the midos that were in the mikdash. So the Mishnah had said that one of the midos was a revius, which we now know means a revius haloik. And the purpose of the midah that was the revius haloik was it was used to measure the water that was needed for the tahiris hamitzayra and the shemen that was needed for the chalois nazar that the nazar brought together with his carbon shlamim when he completed his naziros. What was the purpose of the measurement that was the chatzi like? So the Mishnah said the purpose of that was for the mayim l'saita. Additionally, for the chatzi loig shemen l'toida, so the carbon toida required a chatzi loig of shemen. Now, the truth is that most menachos, the Mishnah itself continued and said, required a loig of shemen. So by saying that the carbon toida's chales required a chatzi loig, it's a little bit of a chiddush because it makes it different than most menachos. Most menachos, how much oil? It's a loig of oil. The Toida required only a chatzi like, and the Gemara is going to elaborate on this. Tanya Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ma Talmud Loimer, Bashemen, Shnei Pamim. Now Rabbi Akiva was referring to a pasuk in Parshas Tzav that discusses the carbon Toida, the pasuk in its entirety. Im al Toida yakrivenu, if a person is bringing a carbon toida, v'hikrav azav chatoida chalois matzois belulois bashemen, urikike matzois meshuchim bashemen, v'soiles murbeches chalois belulois bashemen. So we know that the carbon toida was made up of 4 types of breads, 10 of each, thus there were 40 chalois. 10 were chametz, 30 were matzah, meaning 1 min was chametz, 3 minim were matzah. What were the 3 minim? So you had chalois, you had rikikim, and then you had the revucha. Now, when the Torah describes each one of the 3 minim of matzahs that the Bala carbon had to bring when he brought the carbon Torah, so the Torah says he had to be chalois matzahs belulois bashemen, urikike matzahs meshuchim bashemen, v'soilas murbechas chalois belulois bashemen. The Torah says that each one of these minim had to come together with oil. And that was Rabbi Akiva's kasha. Rabbi Akiva said, Ma Talmud Leimer Bashemen Shnei Pamim. Now the truth is, it doesn't just say Bashemen twice. It says Bashemen 3 times. All 3 of the minim of Chalos Toida that were matzah, the Torah says Bashemen, and the Gemara is going to address that later. But for now, Rabbi Akiva's concern is the first 2. Says Rabbi Akiva, I had said Bashemen once, I would have thought, I would have thought that the amount of oil needed for the Chalos Toida is the same as the amount of oil that's needed for all menachos, which is a loig. Achshav shekasa b'Hashem and B'Hashem. Now the Torah said the word B'Hashem twice. Havi riboy achar riboy. Vein riboy achar riboy elo l'mayit. So essentially, the Torah is being marba shemen, but not once. The Torah is being marba shemen twice. Riboy achar riboy is always a miyut. Miyut hakasav lechatzi like freik the Gemara. Riboy achar riboy chad riboy who? Why is this a riboy achar riboy? Riboy achar riboy means the Torah was marba and then the Torah was marba again. Here the Torah wasn't marba twice. The Torah was only marba once. Once the Torah said shemen, you need that, and then the Torah has a second bashemen, which is a riboy. So, riboy achar riboy is a miyot. If there's 2 riboyim, here you only have 1 riboy. So how do you make 1 riboy a miyot? It's 2 riboyim that are a miyot. So Rabbi Akiva explains. What would have been said? Rabbi Shimon had said. Rav Akiva, regarding the Shemen, not Rav Shemen, said, what would have been the halacha? I would have thought that it's like a regular mincha and it requires like achshem, bashemen. In other words, both bashemens are extra. Torah didn't have to say the word bashemen at all. Because without bashemen, I would know it's a mincha. Every mincha needs shemen. How much shemen alike? So it comes out that both bashemens are ribuyim. Have a riboy achar riboy, vein riboy achar riboy, elo l'mayit miyatei hakasav lechatzi like says the Gemara vayiter yochel yechatzi like zemeschalik l'shalishus minim. I would have thought if there's a halacha of chatzi like and there's 3 minim, so take the chatzi like and now divide it equally amongst the 3 minim. L'chales u'l'rikik and u'l'revicha. Says the Gemara kishuoyme b'shemen b'revicha. The Torah says the word b'shemen 3rd time. Tzim dritten she'ein Talmud loymar. Why do I need it a 3rd time? Right. The first part of Rabbi Akiva, he explained the first 2 bashemens. Both bashemens are extra, riboy achar riboy l'mayit, that it's not a loik like all menachos, it's only a chatzi loik. But what do I need the next bashemen for? Oh, it's coming to teach me, haketzad, that there's a disproportionate amount of shemen that was used for that 3rd min of chalos toida mentioned in the Gemara. Maybe chatzi loik shemen, you take a chatzi loik, v'choytzeyo, What do you get if you divide a chatzi loik? You get 2 reviyos. Chetzioi lechalos l'rekikim. You're going to use a reviyos for the chalos and the rekikim. The chetzioi l'revichas. The reason the Torah mentioned again Bashemen with regards to the revichas to tell me that there's a disproportionate amount of shemen that's going to be used for that. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah heard Rabbi Akiva shtickle Torah, which essentially was the source to the halacha of the Mishnah that says that although all menachos or most menachos had a loik shemen, but the Chalois Toida, which was also a mincha, had a chatzi like shemen. It was based on the fact that the Torah wrote the word bashemen twice extra. It's a riboy, acha riboy, acha riboy elamayit. Instead of a loik shemen, it's a chatzi loik shemen. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah told Rabbi Akiva, you could bring bashemens all day. This is not the makar. We have to explain why the Torah wrote Bashemen 3 times, but that's not the makar. What is the makar? The echad aser yom shebei nida lenida, the halach of shemeres yom ki'eked yom, which is that 11-day period. Halacha l'Moshe misinai has nothing to do with the words Bashemen, 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 but rather it's based on a halacha l'Moshe misinai. So the Mishnah said, continued. And the Mishnah said, all menachos, or almost all menachos, required how much oil? A loik. And then the Mishnah said a chiddush. That let's say somebody brings a mincha that has many isroinos. The halach is for each isaron you have to have a loik. But not just that, the way you measure the oil is loik by loik. So the Mishnah's example was, if you had a really, really big mincha, it was made up of 60 esroinos of soilas. So you can't take this huge medida, measure 60 esroinos, 60 lugan of oil, and mix it. No, you have to do it loik by loik by loik. The point was, ubeloik hayemoidet lechol hamenachos afilu mincha shel samech isaron noisen lo samech loik. And then the Mishnah brought Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. This is Mishnah Sleish Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which is Kavanaki. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, no, afilu mincha shel samech isaron ein lo ela luga. That the halacha is you never have more than 1 loik for a mincha. So it's not that you have a loig of shemen for every isaron of soilus that you have, but rather the way it works is that for every mincha, all you have is 1 loig. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, b'mitzoira on iksiv, regarding the mitzoira of the ani, the pasuk says, isaron balul v'loig. So the halacha is that a mitzoira, when he brought his karbanos, when he came to be mitar himself, he was able to elect the type of carbon to bring based on what his financial status was. So one of the karbanos, oil v'yoyre, that the Torah talks about is the karbanos of the Mitzayra. The Torah says that if the Mitzayra could afford it, he would bring 3 behemos. If the Mitzayra couldn't afford it, then all he would bring was 1 behema. The Torah says, V'im dalhu, v'ein yadim aseges, v'lok hakeves echad asham. He brought 1 animal as opposed to 3. That animal was an asham. L'chaper olav, v'isarin soiles echad bolul bashemen. And together with his 1 animal, he had to bring an isarin of soiles that was mixed together with oil. L'mincha, that was the mincha. V'loik shaman, and there was a loik sham. Now, Pashup Shan in this pasuk is very straightforward. The Mitzayra is bringing 1 keves. Together with this 1 keves, he's bringing 1 isaron of soiles. That's bolul bashemen. It's going to be a loig of shemen, like all menachos. That's going to be the mincha that's going to come along together with his keves. Then he's going to bring a loig shemen, because we know that the shemen, and specifically a loik shemen, was a very important part of the Tairas HaMitzayra. Stating that, the Gemara feels that there's a lot of extra words in this pasuk. Although at first glance there isn't, but the Gemara is going to darshan based on Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and the Dreshes Behem some very important fundamental menachos halachas from what at first glance seems to be a very innocent pasuk. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabban ben Tzayra ani ksiv isarin balul v'loik. Li made we learn from here ali isarin shata'on loik, that every single isarin that a person brought together with his mincha required a loik. Isarin balul biloik teaches me that every Yisara needs a loik. And again, it's not Pashup Shan in the Pasuk. Pashup Shan in the Pasuk is V'Yisara and Soilas Echa Balu B'Hashem Al Mincha, comma, or period. Loik Shaman. The loik Shaman is a whole separate thing. It's not even part of the Mincha. That's the loik Shaman that's going to go on the Bahainos of the Mitzayra. It's a completely independent part of the Tyrus of Mitzayra. But we're somehow marrying the word Yisara. We're skipping 5 words to the word like to teach me every Yisara needs a like. They learn no, just the opposite. That if you're bringing a mincha, it doesn't matter how big the mincha is, all you have is 1 like. And how do you know that? From the same pasuk. Shenemar lemincha the loik shaman. Every mincha has only one loik shaman. Again, in the pasuk, mincha and loik shaman don't come together. It's the mincha, period, the loik shaman. But somehow the Tanam put it together, and that's how they had this halacha. What did they do with the Chachamim's drasha? Hula gufe. That's coming to teach me pashit, that the Mitzayra had to bring mincha that had in it shemen. The Rebbe Eliezer and the Chacham say, no, you don't need a pasuk to tell me that the Mitzayra had to bring a mincha that was made up of one insar. Why? Because being that the Mitzayra Asher brings gimel karbanos, and together with his gimel karbanos, the Torah says he brings gimel esroinos, 3 esroinos, hacha, the chad carbon. Here that this Mitzayra ani is bringing only one carbon, chad isarin, so it makes sense that he should only bring one isarin. So why do I need a pasuk to tell me that he brings an isarin? Must be it's extra to teach me not a halacha regarding the mincha that the Mitzayra ani brought, but rather a halacha that teaches me more generally regarding all menachos. I would have thought, no. But Rebbe Eliezer and Nehemiah say that it's not true, because being that you find that the Torah altered, the Torah changed the nature of the carbon that the Mitzayra brings when he's an ani versus what he brings when he's an asher. So I would have thought maybe it doesn't have a mincha either. So that's why the Torah had to tell me he brings an isar. You can't darshan anything from there. What did the Chachamim say? No, you find in Oila V'Yored that the amount could change, but to tell me that the usher has to bring a mincha and the ani doesn't have to bring a mincha at all, that you don't find. What did the Rabbanon do with the drush of Reb Eliezer and Reb Nehemiah of the mincha like shaman? It's coming to teach me that if somebody is being menadif from mincha, he can't bring less than the amount of soilus that ordinarily would require a like. What is Reb Eliezer and Nehemiah? How do they know this halacha that the minimum size mincha has to be an isarin? They learn it also from that pasuk. Somehow in those words of the mincha b'leik shami, you don't just learn one halacha, but you learn 2 halachas. Regardless, we have a pasuk here talking about the Mitzayra ani, which at first glance is just telling me what the Mitzayra ani is supposed to bring. Instead of bringing 3 carbonos, he brings 1 carbon. The carbon that he brings is going to be a carbon asham. His carbon asham is going to have 1 isarin. Meaning the Mitzayra asher had 3 isroinos with his 3 animals. The Mitzayra ani is going to have 1 isarin. The isarin is going to be balu bashemen. That's going to be the mincha. And additionally, there's a like shaman that's part of the Taryas HaMitzayra. Stating that the Tanam were bothered with some nuances in this pasuk, and it's from this pasuk regarding the Mitzayra ani that the Chachamim and Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Nehemiah, it's also Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov in our Mishnah learned their positions respectively. When somebody brought a carbon mincha, if it was 1 isarin, there was 1 loik shaman. That everybody agrees with. What if there were 10 isroinos? How much shaman was there? The Chachamim say for every isarin there was a loik shaman. It's learned out from this pasuk. Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov said in the Mishnah, and it's from Nehemiah here in the Bryce as well, that no, every mincha, it didn't matter how many esroinos there were, all there was like 7. Another halacha that's learned out from this pasuk is that the minimum shir mincha had to be an isarin. Either way, the Mishnah said shisha lapar, arba la'ayil, and shlishis lekeves. So the amount of oil that had to be brought together with a par as part of its mincha was shisha, meaning 6 lugin, which is a chatzi hin. A hin is made up of 12 lugin. So one of the sheva midos was the chatzi ahin. It was used for the mincha that came together with the par. Arba la'ayil. Arba is 4 lugin, which is a third of a hin. That's the shlishis ahin la'ayil. And the shloisha lakeves, that's 3 lugin, which is the revius ahin lakeves yayin zois oilas chodesh bechadshe. We all know the pasuk, right? So that's the shlish, and those are 3 again of the 7 midos that the Mishnah mentions. Says the Gemara, mi nolan. How do you know all this? Because the pasuk says v'niskeim chatzi ahin yelapar. So the par has a chatzi ahin, and trace lugin happy, and we know that a hin is 12 lugin. How do you know that a hin is 12 lugin? Because the pasuk says shemen zayis hin. It says shemen zayis hin. V'ksiv shemen mishchas kodesh yezeli. So the shemen zayis measured a hin. And regarding the shemen zayis, it says this is the shemen zayis that Moshe Rabbeinu used to anoint the Kohanim and the Kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, etc. Torah refers to it as Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yezeh, and Zeh is Begematria Tracer Havyin. The bottom line is, if the Moshe Rabbeinu Shemen Zayis is Zeh, and Zeh is Begematria 12, and we know that it was a hin, so it's 12 something into the hin, must be 12 lugin. That's how you know it's 12 lugin in the hin. So when the Mishnah said that the par had how much oil, it had 6 lugin. You know what it's based on? It's based on the pasuk that says V'nischeim Chatzi Ahin Yeh Lapar. a hin is 12 lugin, thus a chatzi hin must be 6 lugin. So this is one of many Gemaras in Shas, not that many, but there are Gemaras in Shas where the Gemara learns out a halacha from a gematria, just one ha'ara, and that is that perhaps one of the better known halachas that the Gemara learns from a gematria is the halacha that Stam Nazirus is Lamed Yoim. So Stam Nazirus is Shloshim Yoim. And how do you know that? So the Gemara Masechtas Nazir Daf Hey Amud Aleph brings a machlokes between Rav Masna and Bar Pada. Rav Masna said, Makra Kadosh Yeh regarding the Nazir, and Yeh is Begematria Talsan Havabar. Pada says it's connected to 30 times that it says in the Torah the word Nazir. It's really only 29 times, and that's a classic Gemara right in the beginning of Masechtas Nazir. But Master said, how do you know Stam Nazir is Shloshim Yoim? It's because it says Kadesh Yeh, and the word Yeh is Begematria 30. If you take a look at the Rosh, in his Pirush Rosh on the Daf in Masechtas Nazir, says the Rosh, Yeh Begematria Talsin Hava, Yira, the Gemara Gemirila, it must have been a Messiah. V'asmechu ahach Gematria. Just, they were masmechin on this Gematria. And the reason is because Gematria is Lav Miyud Gimel Midah Shar Torah Nedrash Espan. You can't learn a halacha from a Gematria. It must be there was a Messiah that Stam Nazirus is Shloshim Yoim. Rav Masna just said, you want to find a remez in the Torah, I have a remez for you. The word Yeh is Begematria 30, thus everything is merumez in the Torah. But it's not really much more than that, says the Rosh. You can't tell me it's a makar. Masna sat down and he said, Yeh is Begematria 30, thus we have a makar to Stam Nazirus Lamed Yoim. So that in this Gemara as well, you can't tell me that there's a makar, that 12 lugin is somehow in the hin. It's an asmachta b'alma. I thought it was interesting because I think that the person more than anyone else that really introduced gematria into the mainstream was the Balaturim. Right? The Balaturim has many gematrias. Every page in Balaturim, there's different ramazim that are based on gematrias. The Balaturim was the Rosh's son. Right? Yaakov ben Rabasha. The Torah always brings Adoni Avi Harash. So it's interesting that the Rosh writes in Masechtas Nazir Daf Hey Amud Aleph that gematria, even though Gemara is called gematrias, all it is a remez ba'alma. You can't really learn much from the gematria. Maisa was the Rosh's son, Rabbeinu Yaakov, the Torah that probably mainstream gematria more than anyone else. Either way, so the Mishnah had said that the menorah every single night required 3.5 lugin of oil. What's the methodology? Because there were 7 neiros, and each ner had a chatzi lug of shem. It says it says mei erev ad boiker. So the halacha is that the kohen, when he lit the menorah, so he had to light a mei erev ad boiker. We learn from there that mei erev ad boiker isn't just the amount of time that the menorah had to be lit, but it's also the shear of how much oil there had to be. Teima midasa shetehedei lekes v'hoileches mei erev ad boiker. There should be enough oil that will allow it to light Mei Erev V'ad Boiker. Davaracha, we'll see that what that means in a moment. Another pshat, Mei Erev V'ad Boiker, Inu Chabodah Shekshir Mei Erev V'ad Boiker, Ela Zubavad, that there's no avodah that's kosher Mei Erev Ad Boiker other than lighting the menorah. We'll see what that means in a minute. V'shira chachamim. So going back to the first pshat in the Brisa, says the Gemara, the first pshat was how much oil? Teima midasa. What's the midah? Shetehei doilekes vehoileches mei erev ad boiker. So how much is that? It's chatzi lug mei urtavat safra. It's a chatzi lug. Rashi explains. Rashi says in a Chumash, we all know this, is that the chachamim took the longest night of the year, which are the leilei tevos, and in the leilei tevos, how much oil would you need for the oil to be able to burn and not extinguish during the night? Literally, me'erev ad boiker, it's a chatzi lug, and it's based on that we have a chatzi lug. So every single night there was a chatzi lug, even though really you only needed the chatzi lug during the leilei tevis. So Freit Tosfos, what then happened on a regular night? So let's say it's not Teves, it's Tammuz. It's one of the shorter nights of the year. So what's going to happen on a short night? You're putting in all this oil. The kohen's going to come the next morning to be made of the neiros. Isn't there going to be leftover oil? So Tosfos says what they would do is they would make the wicks a little bit thicker. They use psilois gasois. So being that the wicks were a little bit thicker or thinner, depending on the nights, they somehow manipulated it to make sure that it would only go me'erev ad boiker. But you couldn't manipulate the amount of oil that was going to be used. The amount of oil, that's the halacha, teima midasa me'erev ad boiker. You find the longest night of the year, and that's how much oil you had to have. That's one pshat in the Gemara. The other pshat in the Gemara is in l'cha avoda shekshera me'erev ad boiker elazim. Now, Pasha, it sounds like what the Gemara is saying is that the kohen would light the menorah at night, and the only avoida that was kosher balayla was adlakas hamenorah. Freiktais sakasha. Is that true? Is that true? Tzarich liyashiv, says Tosfos, aktaras eivarim v'trumas hadesh, and do it two avodas that were done at night. The aktaras eivarim, that's connected. Ma'ariv is connected to aktar. That, of course, we know was kosher balayla and trumas hadeshen. That was done first thing in the morning, but before it really became morning, which means it was done at the end of the night. So I have two avodas that walk shera may erev vad boiker. So Tosfos says a doichik. Tosfos says regarding the haktaras emurim that you have to say that it's true that it was kosher balayla, but it was also kosher bayoy, as opposed to the hadlakas hamenorah that had to be done at night. But the bottom line is, it sounds like from Tosfos, when would the kohen light the menorah? He would light by shkiyas hachamer, right at the beginning of the night. That's when he would light the menorah. Rashi, Mesechtes Yuma, Daf Tezvav and Aleph, says a whole different shot in the Gemara. Rashi says that when the Gemara says Ein locha avoda shekshera me'erev ad boiker ela zu bovad, means that really the hadlakas hamenorah was done during the day, and there was no avoda that was allowed to be done during the day until the next morning. After the Hadlakas HaMenorah. Aktaras Emurim is not an Avodas Yoim. That's an Avodas Layla. Hadlakas HaMenorah, which was an Avodas Yoim, was the last Avodas Yoim that was able to be done at Boiker. The fact that you could do Aktara, that's an Avodah that's kosher balayla. We're talking about Avodas that are not kosher balayla. Such an Avodah, the last Avodah that could be done during the day, was the Hadlakas HaMenorah. So just like this halach of Allah, Hashdan Kol HaKarbanos, the Tomach Ben Abayim was the last carbon that was brought during the day, so too the last Avodah that was done during the day was the menorah. But it comes out, at first glance, there seems to be a very fundamental machlokes. When did the kohen light the menorah? Did he light the menorah at night? Did he light it during the day? It seems to be based on how to understand this Gemara of Ein l'cha avoda sheksher me'erev ad boiker elazu. Tosfos and Menachos daf Peites and Aleph says the hadlakas hamenorah was done at night. Rashi and Yuma daf Tezvav and Aleph says that the hadlakas hamenorah was done during the day. If you look at the Mefarshei Chumash, Even Ezra, the Ramban, the Mefarshei Chumash already debate this. Regardless, it seems to be a little bit unclear. Me'erev ad boiker, is it before erev, the last avodah, or is it no, ready after shkiyas hachama? Regardless, so the halacha is how much oil. The amount of oil is a chatzi loik, and it's based on the first pshat in this brisa. Me'erev ad boiker tein la midasa shetei doilekas v'ilechas me'erev ad boiker. So the Gemara says something interesting. The Gemara says, how did they figure out the amount of oil that's needed? Ikadami, some say milmala lamata shiru. What they did was the ikadami mimata lamata shiru. But they says machlokes whether the first time they lit the menorah and they had to figure out how long it's going to take for the oil to burn. So that they start off with a little bit of oil, and they saw that it went till 3 o'clock in the morning. So they knew for next time they would have to add, and then it went till 4 o'clock, and then after 5. Finally, they were able to figure out how much oil they need. Or maybe it was just the opposite. They started off with a very large share, and they saw they had leftover oil. So the next day they did a little bit less, and the next day they did a little less. And this is hashtag rest of the story. How did the Chachamim figure out how much oil needed to be done? So some said that they started low, they went memata l'maylo, and some said they went memata l'maylo. What's the nafkamina? It says memata l'maylo shir atayra chasa mamayim mishal Yisrael. It's based on this principle that keeps on repeating itself. HaTorah chasa al mamayim mishal Yisrael. So we're not going to just go out and throw away oil. So start low because we don't want to waste oil. It says that it's just the opposite. It's true. There's an idea of Atayra Chas al Mamayim Shal Yisrael. But this is the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to act as if we're so sensitive over a little bit of oil. That's anius. Ein anius b'makam hashiras. This is the Beis Hamikdash. So it's interesting. We've had so many times just recently Atayra Chas al Mamayim Shal Yisrael, and now all of a sudden the Gemara just introduced an idea that would seem to be the diametric opposite, which is Ein anius b'makam hashiras. And you see that they're opposed because the Gemara says if you hold Hatayra Chas al Mamayim Shal Yisrael, you're going to go mimata l'maylo. And if you hold Ein anius b'makam hashiras, you don't want to show sensitivity to a little bit of oil. So you go with a braid kite, then you go mil maila lamata. So every time you have Atayra Chas al Mamayim Shal Yisrael, why don't you say Ein anius b'makam hashiras? Or any time you have Ein anius b'makam hashiras, why don't you say Atayra Chas al Mamayim Shal Yisrael? So there's a tshuva from the Neiv of Yehuda with the tshuva me'ahava asked the Neiv of Yehuda this question, and they were mafalful back and forth with cheshbainis, but that's not for this morning. Regardless, just one ha'ara before we start the next Mishnah, and that is, so how much oil had to be inside the menorah? Each lamp had to have a chatzi loik. What's it based on? It's based on the pasuk that says me'erev ad boiker, teila midasa shetei doilekas v'ilechas me'erev ad boiker. You take the longest night of the year. What's the longest night of the year? The leilei teves. The leilei teves, you need a chatzi loik. Chasam Sofer in his Teras Moshe in Parshas Tetzaveh says, we're all familiar with the Ner Maravi. The Ner Maravi was doilek the entire night. Says the Chassam Sofer, I think that from this Gemara right here, Menachos Daf Pei Tes Amud Aleph, and the Ner Maravi, which the Gemara discussed earlier, Menachos Pei Vav Amud Beis, and it's also in Shabbos Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis. Perhaps we can find a makar to what the Gemara says in Bava Kama, Daf Tes Bava Kama, that Hider Mitzvah is Ad Shlish. So we know that halacha is Zek Keli Vanvei. We learn from there a concept of Hider Mitzvah. So let's say you have an esrog, and then there's an esrog that's Muhudar. So obviously, there's an idea to take the esrog that's Muhudar. How much more do you have to pay for the esrog that's Muhudar versus the ordinary esrog, or any mitzvah? How much is a person supposed to overpay for Hider Mitzvah? So when it comes to, for example, hamavazves al yavazves yoysa michaymish. That's with regards to how much of your net worth are you supposed to spend for mitzvahs. You're not mechuyev to be left with no money because you did a mitzvah. So al yavazves, it's even an isser yoysa michaymish. This is something else. This is a question where I have two mitzvahs in front of me. One is more mehudah than the other. I'm willing to overpay for hider mitzvah. The question is, how much should I overpay? So the halach is hider mitzvah ad shlish. You go up until a third. A third more, that's how much you can pay. Says the Chassam Sofer, I think I have a makar. Because the Gemara says how much oil was put into the menorah every night. It was a chatzi loy, kalele tevis. Says the longest night of the year is 16 hours. That's the leile tevis. The ner maravi lit for how long? 24 hours. Says the Chassam Sofer, 24 is a shlish more than 16. If you go milavar. Because if you go milavar, one lit for 16, the other lit for 24, the difference is 8. 8 represents 1/3 of the total amount. It's a shlish milavar. The ner maravi was the hider mitzvah of the menorah. So how much oil was there for 16 hours? How long did the ner maravi lie? 24 hours. Says the Chassam Sofer, I think that this is a makar nifla to what Chazal said in Bava Kama Daf Tes, that hider mitzvah is at shlish. But says the Chassam Sofer, it only works if you go shlish milavar. No, it's a problem because the Gemara Bava Kama Daf Tes clears the shaila. Ibayluhu shlish milavar or shlish milagav salacha lemaisa. You have to know. But says the Gemara over there blibes with a teiku. So it says the Chassam Sofer that although the Gemara over there wasn't sure, but at the end of the day the Gemara says teiku. I mean that the Gemara says teiku misafik, you would have to go with the higher number. The higher number is the milavar. It's not mitulagav. So it says the Chassam Sofer that at the end of the day it works out because lemaskana it's a teiku. Teiku means that the way we are machriya the halacha is we go lechumra and it's a shlish mi levar. Works out very nicely with the ner maravi. There was oil for 16 hours and it ended up burning a shlish milavar, which is 24 hours. But the truth is that last line in the Chassam Sofer is really not so pasha. So we're not learning the hasugis of hider mitzvah, we're not learning Perek Arbavas and Zikin now, Bava Kama Daf Tes, but really it's a shaila in the Rishonim, whether misafik you go l'chumra with hider mitzvah, or misafik you go l'kula. And it's based on Zek Keli Vanveyo. Is it a mitzvah's essay da'iraisa? Or is it only a mitzvah's essay d'Rabbanan? Rashi and Tosfos in the beginning of Perek Lulav Hagazal, they make bracha, v'hadvarim atikin, ve'en kamekoymai. But here you have a geshmak and avgevina l'alacha. Is hider mitzvah, zeh kelim aveyo. Is it a din d'Iraisa, or is it a din d'Rabbanan? If it's a din d'Iraisa, then the yibayot d'loi ifshaton, bava kama dav tasam beis is a safik d'Iraisa, which you're going to go l'chum, it's going to have to be a shlish milavar. But if zeh kelim aveyo is only mitzvah d'Rabbanan, then it's an yibayot d'loi ifshaton, a safik d'Rabbanan, where you go l'kula. Then it's going to be a shlish milagav. So the Chassam Sofer just throws in derech agav. It stems very nicely with the maskanas like Gemara. It's not so pashut. Ein sham birash. It's a big discussion in the Rishonim whether lahalacha we're machriya that Gemara as a safik d'Iraisa or machriya that Gemara as a safik d'Rabbanan. Zok the Mishnah weiter. Ma'arvin nischei parim be nischei elam. So we saw that different, although the standard mincha had a loik shemen, but there were different menachos that had different shiurim. So for example, the par had a chatzi ahin, which is 6 lugin. The ayil had a shlishas ahin, which is 4 lugin. The keves had a revius ahin, which is 3 lugin. Says the Mishnah, how about in terms of esroides? How about the amount of soilas? So the par, which had 6 lugin of shemen, had 3 esroides of soilas. The ayil, which had 4 lugin of shemen, had 2 esroides of of soilus. The keves that had 3 lugin of shemed had 1 isarin of soilus. If you look at it from a ratio, from a proportion perspective, the par had 6 lugin to 3 isroinis. It was a 2-to-1 ratio of oil to soilus. The ayil, which had 4 lugin and 2 isroinis, it too was at the same ratio, 2-to-1. The keves, which had 3 lugin and 1 isarin, that was at a 3-to-1 ratio, and that matters for this next halacha. Ma'arvin niskei parim b'niskei elim. You're allowed to be ma'ariv the nisachim of the parim with the nisachim of the elim. So pashut, we'll see in the Gemara that it's really not so pashut, but at first glance, if you're learning Mishnayos, for sure, what the Mishnah is referring to is if you have a minchas, you have the soilus balula bashemen of the par, which is 6 lugin to 3 esroinis of soilus, and then you have soilus blul bashemen of an ayil, which is 4 to 2, you're allowed to be ma'ariv the 2 with each other. And the reason is because proportionately, the amount of oil and the amount of soilus are the same for the par and the ayil. Nischei kvasim and nischei kvasim. Additionally, you're allowed to take 1 minchas nesachim of a keves with another minchas nesachim of a keves, because they're both 3-to-1 ratio, and you're allowed to be married. Kvasim shal yachid v'shal tzibur. That's also not a problem. Shal yoyim v'shal emish. Today's and yesterday's is also not a problem. You can be married. But you can't be married the nesachim of the kvasim together with the nesachim of the parim and the elam. V'im balu an elu b'fnei yatzman ve'elu b'fnei yatzman v'nisarvu ksher. If, however, each one was mished independently, and then they got mixed up together, that's no worries. But if they got mixed up, meaning before you were bailel, the soilus and the shemen of the par and the soilus and shemen of the keves, then they got mixed up, then even b'di'evid, it's going to be possible. And then the Mishnah says that keves habama omer, the keves that came together with the omer, alpha bisham and chasik kfula, even though the mincha was double, we'll see about that in tomorrow's stuff. So regardless, what the Mishnah said is, what happens if 2 menachos got mixed up? That's essentially the question. You have soilus blul bashemen, you have soilus blul bashemen, and then they got mixed up. So if the soilus wasn't blul bashemen yet, then everything got mixed up. So that's a little more complicated. That's not what we're going to discuss right now. We're discussing when you already had the soilus blul bashemen of the par, the soilus blul bashemen of the ayil, the soilus blul bashemen of the keves. So if it's the par and the ayil that got mixed up, it's not a problem. Because even though one has 6 lugin to 3 esroinis, one has 4 lugin to 2 esroinis, but proportionally it's the same ratio. It's both 2-to-1. So the fact that they got mixed up doesn't bother me. If, however, the par got mixed up with the keves, or the ayil with the keves, then it's going to be a problem. Because one is on a 2-to-1 ratio, the other one is at a 3-to-1 ratio. But regardless, as long as the ratio is consistent, I don't care. Keves, par, ayil. Even par, ayil is also going to be fine. Ruben, I'll ask you a kasha v'ktira. It says regarding the mitzvah k'taras chalavim, shlo ya'arev chalavim b'chalavim. They are not allowed to be ma'arev chalavim b'chalavim. So the kohen wasn't allowed to take 2 chalavim of different karbanis and put them on the mizbech at the same time. It says v'ktiroi. It could have said v'hiktir, and we learn from there that it has to be 1 at a time. What's the kasha? So how you allowed to take 2 menachos that got mixed up with each other and put them together on the mizbech? Rabbi Yochanan says im nisarvu kai. The Mishnah never said you could do it lekatchila. All the Mishnah meant was you could do it b'di'evet. The Gemara says ihachi. You can't read the Mishnah that way. Why? Because the Mishnah said ema arv nischei kvasim v'nischei parim ve'elam va'afilu nisarvu nami lev. Midiktani sefer mean that the sefer says bol elu b'fnei yatzim elu b'fnei yatzim v'nisarvu ksherim. That b'di'evet the halacha is it doesn't matter what the taruvos was. It's kosher. Michal the reisha lekatchila kamar. So what do you see from there? That the Reisha is discussing, because the Mishnah is distinguishing between taruvos where the proportion of shemen and soilus is the same versus taruvos where the proportion of the soilus and the shemen is different. Where they're different, you're not allowed to be ma'arvit, but b'di'evet it's okay. When they're the same, obviously, it's even l'katchila okay. Because if you're going to tell me that when it's the same, it's only b'di'evet okay, then what's the difference if the ratio is the same as the ratio is different? The Mishnah said clearly that when the ratio is different, it's b'di'evet okay. Must be that when the ratio is the same, it's even l'katchila okay. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say im nisarvu kai that you're right? You're never allowed to put 2 karbanos on the mizbech at the same time. You can't even take the chalavim of 2 animals and put them on the mizbech at the same time. You certainly can't take a taruvos of different menachos and put them on the mizbech at the same time. And when the Mishnah says you could do it, it meant to be it's not true. Because the Mishnah is distinguishing between ratios, and the Mishnah says everything is kosher b'di'evet. Must mean when the ratio is the same, it's even kosher l'katchila. Amar Abaye said you're right. You have to say hold it from Shana the Mishnah. Hachi karma. When the Mishnah says it was a taruv, it's not what we thought. We thought the taruvos was that the menachos got mixed up. That's not what got mixed up. The yayin got mixed up. It's the wine that came together with the minchas hazachin. Hachi karma ma'arvin yeinam im nesarev salt v'shamnam v'yeinon. Look, what it means is the wine of the animals whose mincha have the same ratio, you're allowed to be ma'arav l'katchila. But to be ma'arev, the mincha itself l'katchila, that's not something that you're ever allowed to do. So Amar Abaye hachi kama ma'arvin yenam. Misarvim sultan v'shamnan v'yenam l'katchila. But the Gemara says that's true. The yayin you're telling me that means sometimes you can't be ma'arev l'katchila. When? If the ratios are different. So the yayin of a par and the yayin of a keves, you can't be ma'arav v'katchila. Right? Abaye just flipped the Mishnah. We're not discussing the mincha, we're discussing the wine. But there's a brayso that says medvar amur misaylos v'shem. Then yayin ma'arav, and you're always allowed to be ma'arav the yayin. So again, the Mishnah can't be talking about yayin. Alam Abaye tweaked it. Heichad the hukter sultan v'shamnan. If you already makta the mincha ma'arav yayin l'katchila, then you're allowed to be ma'arav the yayin l'katchila. There's no issue being ma'arav yayin. That's what the brayso means when it says you could always be ma'arav yayin l'katchila. That's when you already makta the mincha. Heichad the loy hukter. But in a case when you were a makter, there the halach is a misarav sultan v'sham the ma'arvin nami yainam. If the taruves happened already, then you can be ma'arav the yayin. Then lav ein ma'arvin, but if not, you can't. Doma asi laruve soilos v'shem l'katchila. And the reason you wouldn't be able to be ma'arav the yayin, it's exera that you may come to be ma'arav the soilos and the shemen. So again, the Mishnah is never saying that you're allowed to go l'katchila and take two menachos, be ma'arav them together, put it on the mizbech. You can't even take two chalavim on the mizbech together. You're certainly not allowed to do that. That's off limits. That's a haktara, and haktara has to be the hektiroi. It has to be the vasachas. What is the Mishnah talking about? It's talking about the wine. Okay, but at the same time, we have to clarify that if the soilus and the shemen were already hooked around the mizbeach, you can do whatever you want with the wine. You can be ma'arav it. It doesn't matter what kind of minchas they come from. Everything is going to be okay. When the Mishnah is distinguishing between the wine of different menachas, it's talking about where it wasn't hooked there yet. So there's a halacha. The wine that comes from two menachas whose soilus and shemen is of the same ratio, l'katchila you're allowed to be ma'arav. The wine that comes from two menachas whose ratio is different, there the halacha is l'katchila you cannot be me'arav. I will pick it up tomorrow.